In the late 1600s, France was a land of power, pomp, and paranoia. King Louis XIV has sung King reigned with unmatched authority. Versailles shimmered with gold. France ruled over much of Europe. But behind the glittering curtains of the royal court, there were secrets, whispers, hidden rooms. And above all, one of the strangest mysteries in French history, a prisoner, locked away in fortress after fortress, moved in silence, guarded more closely than any other man in the kingdom. His name, no one knew. His face, always hidden for over 3 decades. This man lived and died in complete anonymity. But the most chilling detail? He wore a mask, not a theatrical mask or one for plague protection. A mask made of metal, a mask he was never allowed to remove in the presence of another soul. The prison guards were forbidden to speak his name. Any attempt to communicate with outsiders was punishable by death. Even the wardens didn't know who he truly was. He was referred to only as the prisoner. Sometimes, he was called Eustache Dauger, a name most historians now agree was either false or borrowed. He was transferred between some of the most formidable prisons in France, being narrow, Saint Marguerite, and finally, the Bastille. Everywhere he went, secrecy followed. No trial, no public charges, no record of why he was locked away. He simply existed, hidden, silence. And then, in 1703, he died, buried under a fake name, erased from history, almost, but the mask remained in people's memories. And the story took on a life of its own. Because how could someone be so important that they had to be erased completely? And yet so dangerous that even their identity had to be hidden forever? Who was this man? A disgraced noble? A spy? A secret royal twin? Or someone whose very existence threatened the throne itself? In the centuries that followed, historians, novelists, and conspiracy theorists would all take their turn trying to unmask him. Voltaire wrote about him. Alexander Dumas turned him into legend. Hollywood gave him a face. But the truth, as always, is stranger than fiction, and the parts ahead. We'll follow the real trail through prison records, royal correspondence, and eyewitness accounts. We'll examine the theories plausible and absurd. And we'll ask the question that has haunted France for over 300 years. Why would a king go to such lengths to hide a single man? They say history repeats itself. But what about the parts we forgot? Welcome to Echoes of History, the channel where we dig up the dusty corners of the past to uncover the weird, the wild, and the wait, what? Stories they didn't teach you in school. Grab your curiosity and maybe a cup of tea, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. To understand the mystery of the man in the Iron Mask, you must first understand the man who kept him hidden. His name was Benny d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars, a career soldier turned jailer. Saint-Mars wasn't just any prison warden, he was the king's man, entrusted with the most delicate and secretive tasks in the entire French penal system. And starting in 1669, he became the permanent guardian of the masked prisoner. Wherever Saint-Mars was posted, the prisoner followed. When Saint-Mars was promoted to a new prison, the man in the mask was quietly transferred with him under tight guard, always in secret, and always kept completely isolated. It began at Pignarol, a fortress-turned prison in the Italian Alps. There, Saint-Mars was given strict orders. The prisoner was to be kept alone, under surveillance at all times, and never allowed contact with other inmates. The prisoner's face was always to remain covered in the presence of others. Letters from Saint-Mars to his superiors often included nervous reports about the prisoner's health, his mood, his meals, but never his name. In one letter, Saint-Mars wrote that the prisoner was being given everything he desires except liberty and communication, a chilling phrase. Then, in the 1680s, Saint-Mars was reassigned to Exilies, another mountain fortress. He took the prisoner with him. Then again in 1687 to the Alps, Saint Marguerite, a secluded island prison off the southern coast of France, and once more in 1698 to the infamous Bastille in Paris. Each time, the same routine: extreme secrecy, total isolation, a masked man, guarded more carefully than assassins, spies, or even rival nobles. And Saint-Mars followed these orders to the letter. He never revealed the prisoner's identity, even in private correspondence. He never let the man speak to outsiders. Even in death, Saint-Mars arranged for a fake name to appear in the burial records. This was not ordinary protocol. This was not just another inmate. Saint-Mars was a loyal servant, but even he, some suspect, may not have known the full story. Only that his orders came from the highest level directly from the king or his most trusted ministers. Which raises a simple but powerful question. What kind of prisoner needs one jailer to follow him for over 30 years, across half the country, through multiple fortified prisons? By the time the masked man died in 1703, the rumors had already begun to grow. Whispers circulated in Paris salons and along the cobbled streets outside the Bastille. People spoke of a man whose face no one had seen, of a prisoner with royal blood, of a secret so dangerous it had to be buried alive. No one knew the truth, but that only made the guessing more intense. Even Voltaire, who spent time in the Bastille himself, became obsessed with the story. In 1751, he wrote, "The prisoner wore a mask which was not of cloth but of steel. He was young and had a noble figure." Voltaire believed the masked man was an older brother of Louis XIV, a legitimate heir who, if revealed, could threaten the king's claim to the throne. Was that possible? Let us look at the theories that began to circulate in the years after the prisoner's death. Theory 1. The king's twin brother, the most famous theory by far and the most romanticized in novels and films. It claimed that the man in the mask was Felipe, the identical twin of Louis XIV. Hidden at birth to avoid a succession crisis, Felipe was raised in secret. then locked away when he reached adulthood. His existence too dangerous for public knowledge. It's the plot Alexandre Dumas used in the Becomte de Bragelonne, where D'Artagnan and the Musketeers rescue the masked brother and swap him with the king. But, historically, there's a problem. There's no record of Queen Anne of Austria giving birth to twins in 1638, and while palace births were dramatic and public, no midwife or noble ever hinted at a second child. Still, absence of evidence isn't always evidence of absence, in a royal court obsessed with appearances. Who knows what could have been hidden? Theory 2. A noble conspirator. Another theory points to Count Ercole Antonio Mattioli, an Italian diplomat who double-crossed Louis XIV in a secret treaty deal. Mattioli had agreed to help France buy a strategic fort, but then leaked the plan to France's enemies. Furious, Louis ordered him kidnapped and imprisoned at Pignero, the same place where the masked man was first held. It fits in many ways. Mattioli's betrayal embarrassed the king. He was politically sensitive, and he disappeared from records around the same time the masked prisoner appeared. But there's a catch. Mattioli was known to be in his 50s, while many who saw the masked man described him as younger. And there's no evidence Mattioli needed to be masked. He wasn't a royal, just a traitor. Would the king go to such extremes for a diplomat? Theory 3. A close servant who knew too much. Some believe the masked man wasn't famous, but rather someone who saw something he shouldn't have. One version says he was a valet to a high-ranking noble and overheard a scandal that could ruin the monarchy, maybe a poisoning plot, maybe the king's infidelities, maybe secrets of war or finance. Rather than kill him, the crown decided to make him disappear permanently. This theory gained traction because of a name that appears in records, Eustache Dauger. St. Mars referred to the masked prisoner using this name at one point, but never consistently. Some historians think Dauger was the man's real name. Others think it was a decoy, just another layer of deception. But what if it was both? What if Eustache Dauger wasn't important for who he was, but for what he knew? By the mid-1700s, the story had spread across Europe. Everyone had a theory, but no one had proof. Because the French court had done an exceptional job. No trial, no documents, no witnesses, just a body buried under a false name and a legacy locked behind a steel mask. By the time the masked prisoner arrived at the Bastille in 1698, he had already spent nearly 30 years in custody, moved like a ghost from fortress to fortress, always under the watch of the same man, St. Mars. Now, in the heart of Paris, he would live out his final chapter. The Bastille was no ordinary prison. It was a symbol, a fortress of stone and fear, a place where political dissidents, writers, nobles, and enemies of the crown were quietly tucked away, sometimes for life. No trials, no appeals, just vanishing when the prisoner arrived. The secrecy intensified. St. Mars had just been appointed governor of the Bastille, his first major act to personally escort the masked man through the gates under cover of night. The guards were told to obey without question. Only a select few even knew the prisoner existed. He was placed in a private cell, well furnished, quiet, and always locked. He had food, a bed, books, even, but never visitors, never letters, never his face. The mask, now believed to be black velvet, reinforced with metal, was still required at all times outside his chamber. Some guards later described him as polite, well-spoken, and calm. He wasn't mad. He wasn't violent. He was, as one man said, a gentleman, imprisoned with exceptional care, and that detail matters. Because the Bastille held murderers, traitors, and revolutionaries, but only this man was treated with such paradoxical dignity and restraint. Why? Was it guilt, fear, or respect for a bloodline no one dared mention? We know that during his 5 years at the Bastille, the prisoner remained healthy. St. Mars continued to manage his every need just as he had done for decades. Then, on November 19, 1703, the records show that the prisoner died. His body was buried under the name Marchiali, a name with no clear origin, no history, no ties. Not even the date of birth was listed. His cell was scrubbed, his possessions destroyed. Every object that might connect him to an identity erased, but one piece slipped through. Later inventories from the Bastille listed an iron mask, stored in a cabinet after the prisoner's death. This mask, simple, cold, and featureless, became the key to the myth. Because while names fade and paper burns, symbols endure, and from that moment on, the story took on a life of its own. When the prisoner died in 1703, the Bastille moved quickly. The name on the death record was false. His belongings were burned or sealed away, and not a single official word was spoken about who he truly was. But the silence only made things louder. Outside the walls of the Bastille, the mystery began to spread like wildfire. First among the guards, then among the prisoners, then across Paris. Who was this man who arrived in the night, never showed his face, and died without a name? By the mid-1700s, just decades later, the tale of the man in the iron mask had become an obsession in French society, and in the absence of facts, stories rushed to fill the gap. Some claimed he was the twin brother of the king, locked away to secure Louis XIV's divine right. Others said he was a disgraced general, a lover of the queen, or even an English spy. One theory suggested the masked man was Louis de Bourbon, the illegitimate son of a royal affair hidden to avoid scandal. Another claimed he was the father of Louis XIV himself, whose existence would have shattered the monarchy's legitimacy. Each version had holes, each lacked hard evidence, but none were dismissed. Why? Because the mask was real, the imprisonment was documented, and the secrecy was undeniable. Even in an age of censorship and control, people wanted answers, and when they couldn't get truth, they turned to fiction. In 1745, a man named Voltaire, a sharp critic of royal power, published a series of works hinting at the Prisoner was someone too high to be named. Voltaire had been imprisoned in the Bastille himself and claimed to have heard whispers from inside. Was he speculating? Was he stirring the pot? Or did he know more than he let on? Then came Alexandre Dumas in 1847. In his epic novel The Vicomte de Bragelonne, Dumas gave the mystery its most famous form. A royal twin, switched at birth, rescued by the Musketeers, locked away by his own brother to keep the throne. It was fiction, yes, but it was irresistible. The idea of a man living behind a mask, silenced by power. Betrayed by family, it spoke to something deeper than just history. It felt like injustice carved into steel. By the 19th century, the man in the iron mask had become a global legend. Paintings, plays, operas, and eventually films brought his image to life. A solemn figure, a prisoner of power, a symbol of everything that royal absolutism tried to hide. And yet, even with the myth growing bigger by the year, no document, no confession, no uncovered artifact has ever confirmed who he was. Which leaves us with one final piece to explore. 3 centuries after his death, the man in the iron mask remains one of France's most haunting enigmas. But modern historians aren't working with myths anymore. They've combed through letters, royal decrees, prison logs, and diplomatic archives, searching for patterns in the shadows. And what they found doesn't point to a royal twin or a secret heir. Instead, it points to someone much less glamorous and far more plausible. A man named Eustache Dauger. He appears in real prison records. Starting in 1669, the same year the masked prisoner entered St. Mars's custody, Dauger was held in Pignarol in strict isolation, with orders that he should speak to no one and be guarded with the utmost care. Strangely, several prisoners came and went from Pignarol during those years, but Dauger stayed and followed St. Mars from fortress to fortress. Sound familiar? Some suggest Dauger was a valet, perhaps to a powerful nobleman or royal minister, who became entangled in a scandal too sensitive for public eyes. One theory suggests he served Cardinal Mazarin, the former Prime Minister of France, and witnessed something politically explosive. Perhaps embezzlement, perhaps blackmail, perhaps even a secret involving the royal family. Another theory claims Dauger was part of a failed poisoning plot, one connected to the infamous Affair of the Poisons, a major scandal involving nobles, witches, and even court favorites during the 1670s. Whatever the case, one thing is clear. Eustache Dauger knew something so sensitive, the court didn't dare execute him, but couldn't let him speak. So they buried him alive in silence. And as decades passed, as the real names faded and guards came and went, Dauger became the mask. There is also compelling evidence that he didn't wear the mask constantly, at least not the way legends describe. Records suggest it was used during transfers to prevent recognition. Descriptions of a velvet mask with metal parts are far more likely than a full iron helmet. So why does the myth persist? Because stories need drama, because iron is heavier than velvet, and because a nameless man in a black mask captures the imagination in a way no valet ever could. But that doesn't make the truth any less tragic. This was a man, whoever he truly was, who lived for over 30 years in enforced silence. No trial, no visitors, no identity. He died with his secrets intact. In the end, the man in the iron mask might not have been a prince. He might not have been anyone we'd recognize in a history book, but he was someone the most powerful men in France wanted forgotten, and that, perhaps, makes him more dangerous than any legend. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments, we're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird. That's it.